time as always. Mm. Oh,
Actually put that on, then I can see better.
that's good. Okay, cool. We're recording. We're live.
Like
Welcome everybody to the StateProof Stoic. I'm your host Carter. I've got two people in the house today. Our main guest is Mr. Messane, and listening in live is actually our fireside chat champion, Mr. Gregory Sumarez, if I'm not mistaken. Welcome to the chat. So it's Justin Messane, right?
That's correct. Mr. Messane is incredibly too formal. I'm going to expect my dad around me.
Okay, Justin, please give us a brief introduction. Tell us a bit more about your journey away from the corporate world into something a bit more eloquent, and then we'll take it from there.
Cool beans. Well, as you said, Justin, definitely not Mr. Messane, but Justin Messane nevertheless. Yeah, dude, it's been pretty much all over the country, but I think in terms of what's relevant and what's changed the way I see things and how I present myself, I pretty much enjoy working with my hands, and somehow I ended up in the signage industry, got stuck in that for about 12 to 15 years, up in Johannesburg, looking after a couple of the big corporates. And loved the job, absolutely loved it. Fast-paced, lucrative business, kind of fed everything that that I needed feeding in terms of how I operate, and from a creative perspective, from a building, from a hands-on perspective, also from working with people. I absolutely love working with not everybody, but certain people. I think people that you resonate with, but I think we're all like that. I'm not going to name corporates because it might get to places where it shouldn't get, but needless to say, I didn't bow down to the requirements to conform to BEE pushed on me from the procurement department. And to cut a long, in-depth story short, I ended up losing most of the work in the space of a couple of months.
Because how dare we idealize competence through social engineering, right?
So completely, and I think I was dumbfounded where I got given potential candidates or suitors that would make good BE partners. I mean, they're not going to buy equity; they're going to just come in. I've got a shelve of 51%, and they got presented to me, and of course they arrive in an Audi A6 convertible. My understanding of BEE is transformation. I'm sorry, you're more transformed than most people I spend my time with. So no, not you. And, my retort eventually was, well, how about I use the guys that have slept in the back of my buckies with me when we've been out in wherever waiting to put up signage, guys who know the trade, who know what we're doing. And I think what mortified me was when I was told by said procurement department, well, are they articulate in a meeting? And I thought, come again? Are they articulate? In their home language, yes, they're articulate, but in English, no, they're probably not, but they know the business. And I think that gave me everything I needed to know. There was an agenda. They're ticking boxes. There's actually no care for true transformation. And as much as I see what's going on around me, I believe in transformation. I do. But it needs to be implemented correctly. It needs to be for the right reasons. There must not be backhands. There must not be any of the skullduggery that is basically the shithole that we're sitting with at the moment. Because the people that matter get left out, and the people that don't need it get exalted. No. So yeah, I dug my heels in, and like I say, the outstanding debtors book diminished rapidly. So my wife, who's sitting over there, she runs the number side of the business. She saw it coming for a while, great. And I tried to, with an entrepreneurial brain, stick my head in the sand. Didn't help. And we got to the point where I'd exhausted every last avenue, from credit card to overdraft to even approaching this corporate and asking and putting all my cards on the table and saying, this is the position I'm in. And it was basically a shut door, flat no. So packed up, and sold about half of what we owned up in Johannesburg. We were staying in Little Falls. Moved down here. Fortunately, my folks have got a little cottage on their property. Staying here and try to make the best of what is here. Dabbled a little bit at an ad agency that my brother owns as a project manager. But you shouldn't really get involved with business with family. So
Too true.
That lasted all of 9-10 months. And I found myself unemployed again. And from there, I think I just sat and I tried to reevaluate my life, and I tried to find where the sweet spot was. And in that whole process, and I think that's where your StateProof Stoic handle kind of resonates with me, where my look on everything is, okay, how am I going to look after myself and those dear and near to me? And how do I do that without relying unnecessarily on the things that would allow me to live that dream? And that ultimately for me presents itself in things like being energy efficient. How do you change your life, your habits in terms of your energy quotient that you require? How do you grow what you can grow, and what do you grow so that you're not going to the shop every now and then? You're giving yourself healthy food, and exploring every avenue around it. So the aquaponics thing came on. I mean, we've eaten tilapia. We've eaten the lettuce, the tilapia shit flowed underneath.
That's the formal term and the beautiful term for that is aquaponics. But yes. I like how, but the actual fact is just as you said, and also technically grape is wine is fermented grapes, right? So if I want to speak like you, it's fermented grapes. So exactly the
same. I got as far as standard 8. So sometimes my vocabulary might not be there. I did go as far as matric, but it was just, I think, to fill in the attendance register. So if I'm not versed eloquently in,
I don't. No. Don't worry. Justin, I'm not like that people with their BE partner that's going to ask you to speak eloquently here. We talk straight here. I just maybe fill in the gaps here and there for the audience, that they don't think we are deliberately just taking poo and hoying it over the lettuce. It's actually a legit system of growing food, and it's called aquaponics, and it's actually very cool. And we can get a bit deeper into that a bit later. So just continue the story. And obviously, yes, if I see a bit of a joke, I'm gonna make it. Some of them are terrible, and I get jokes credit, but it's also fine.
Then being down here with my dad, I've he's always been in the industry, and I'll get into that. I don't want to say one of the forefathers, because he'd probably kick me in the head, but because he's very humble. But him and his best friend Doran Bungie are, as far as macadamia, pecan, and avo, they're probably two of the top guys in the country in terms of how do you grow them, how do you look after them, and how do you get them to market for your best value return?
Right.
And they started that, I would guess, around 25 years ago. And for the record, he's not my biological dad. Well, my biological dad had wet spaghetti for a spine and disappeared when I was 3. He stepped in and took his place. Ergo, he's my dad. Nice. And I sit next to him in the office every day, and I'm learning at a rate of knots. In particular, when I saw your post about macadamia, pecan, and avo, that's his forte. Absolute forte.
So I worded them exactly in the right order to get your attention.
100%. When I saw this, I thought, hey. And to give you an example, we were now at Jan Kempdorp. We were supposed to have a meeting last week, and I said we couldn't. And the guys up there have got a tremendous operation going. But before we get into that, he's a well of information. He's sitting upstairs in the main house. He's got an honorary rangers webinar tonight, which he's dedicated to. So unfortunately, he can't join us. But I did say to him, if anything pops up
We'll definitely do an EP2. I mean, maybe we'll do this as an introduction, push you as far as you can go, and then we bring him in at EP2, probably 3, 4, and 5 as I see it, because tapping into this is a wealth of knowledge. So the reason why I want to have you on, and the reason I got to this point is exactly that, right? Mm-hmm. My future vision is to have a state-proof homestead. Yeah. Where we are growing all manner of things, nuts, berries, strawberries, mushrooms, etc. And we actually train people how to do these things. We also want to partner with various agricultural institutions to send their students there for practical, but also for companies that want to develop product to do research and development there. Okay. So we have, let's call it a little campus, but a little agricultural campus for self-sustainability. So everything on that place is dedicated. And we use the principles of permaculture, which is like you want to kind of recycle everything as far as possible, use energy as far as possible, and also keep everything that you use, see if you can't upcycle or recycle it. So you actually have a minimum waste footprint. Now, what really gets my fucking blood pumping is these COP26 people that go to these global climate things. And I want to ask these people a few questions, right? Because they always ask what the planet needs, but they never ask what do fucking humans need. It's very ironic. And these people hate human beings, and they really want to drive the carbon footprint down to zero, meaning we're back to being cavemen. Yeah. And I also want to ask a few questions. Have any of you fuckers ever planted a tree? Have you ever planted a fruit tree? Because I'm also thinking, like, all the trees we see in parks as well, why aren't those fruit trees to feed people? Why don't we have more community gardens? What's the legislation that stands in the way of that? And how can we loosen that? My whole idea is getting out of the cities, but I also want to think in a way of can't we have more parks? Because I've seen 1 or 2 parks with actual community gardens that actually work quite well. And actually, if we plant trees, why the fuck aren't they fruit or nut trees that can actually feed people? Yeah. And I've never understand why not. I look at the world as it is, and I see so many flaws and so many lost opportunities. You get something like a pecan tree that doesn't need a lot of water, but it produces a ton of nuts, for instance, and also some fruits. I'm still growing in the old fruit tree thing, but that is such a good idea, like starting to plant trees that actually give us shelter, so it makes it cool and it blocks the wind, but it can also it has utility to actually feed your family. Yeah. And I've never understood why I'm not seeing more of that. Why people aren't planting plants. Like, I go into someone's garden and I see fucking ornamental plants that are pretty, but they can't feed your family. I get angry. Like, why are there no tomato plants? Why have you become a slave to the supply chain? I don't understand these things. It angers me for obvious reasons, like you said earlier. So I want to take a few steps back. I don't know if you've ever heard or read or Atlas Shrugged. It's a book by Ayn Rand, where the communists basically, or the crony capitalists, drive away all the smart and intelligent and industrious people, and they create their own different place. So they break away from the system and form their own enclave, if I can put it like that. So all the great inventors, all the great minds break away from the mainstream system because bureaucrats and communists and unions have destroyed the economy. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Very.
So I haven't read the book yet. That's the gist of it. I've read another of Ayn Rand's book, To the Fountainhead. That's the one thing that I'm seeing in your story. Then the other thing is, like I said, that ability to grow your own stuff. And what you also mentioned is becoming less reliant on the supply chain. Starting with the basics, start growing tomatoes and peppers. That shit's easy to grow. Maybe some herbs, some basil. Start there, and then, you have to train yourself. You have to read. You have to. Luckily, you've got expertise on tap with your father, which is excellent. I mean, that's first prize, right? You can go out with them, and you can actually have hands-on training. So yeah, that is incredible. So I just wanted to give my 5 cents on that. So at the end of the day, I want to move to the Western Cape because it's not decaying like all the other places, and find a spot to actually plant these things. But find a spot where, even if I have to put up maybe a bit of a greenhouse, that's fine. For, let's say, the avocados or whatever trees and different crops might need that, and then start growing these things out. And then obviously have a center where It's almost like a little training center where you can have workshops, not just the agricultural people, anyone in the area that wants to do workshops. And obviously I have a few terminals there where people can actually upload the data and process the data that they've captured. And then it also takes things like hydroponics and aeroponics, and you put devices, into IoT devices in there where you can not just regulate, but measure water temperature, vapor temperature, tower temperature, the pH of your water, mineral index, and obviously those things you can adjust later automatically. You know, still have to develop that technology locally. It is internationally, but that's the kind of future I envision. So yeah, that's just kind of to give people context of where my mind is going with this whole thing. I'm kind of thinking way into the future, but first off is to get a place somewhere in the Western Cape, know a place, you know, your father probably knows what areas would be conducive to this, has the right soil profile to kind of rock what I want to do, because obviously that cannot be done anywhere, because you can fix soil for vegetables. It's much more difficult with trees because those roots go deep. Yeah. So it has to be the right profile. So area-wise, what are we talking about? And feel free, if I cut you off about something, continue to talk about anything else that might add a bit more context to that.
No, dude, no, please don't apologize. What I've learned and what I've seen from him, altitude and general rainfall plays a big role in what you're going to grow. So a pecan nut doesn't like boggy soil, wet soil, where a macadamia nut actually doesn't mind it. An avo, depending on which avo, also doesn't mind it. So I think from the outset, you're going to need to decide what it is you want to do, and you've given me a rundown on that, and that's very admirable. I like the way you're going, because I'm all for teaching people how to do things. The way I see life is there's no prizes for finishing first. We've all got to get there.
Right.
Whether I'm right or wrong, that's just something that's always been in me, and that's how I always feel. I want to pull everybody with me, that there's prosperity for everybody. So what you're saying in terms of teaching people, creating a center, a learning center, a development center is fantastic. I like that. I think from the offset, though, you'd have to decide what it is you want to grow. Look, your veggies and your herbs, you can pretty much do anywhere in climate control with a cheap polycarbonate. That's a no-brainer. But in terms of pecans and avos, if there's a financial driving factor behind it, i.e. you want to produce the stuff, but you want to go to a processor so that there's a monetary value associated to it. In other words, you want to ship a couple of tons of pecan nuts out. That's going to change your location decision. Because from a macadamia and a pecan nut perspective, your processing side of things is just as crucial as your growing. And I say that because you know what a macadamia nut looks like. You're not going to crack that bugger like you can with a pecan nut in your bare hands.
So, I'm not going to hire 5 people with hammers on them, because then I'll just screw up the nut completely.
Exactly. So now small nuances come into play. So if you're going to look at macadamia nuts, which is probably after avos one of your highest yielding produces you can go for, you're going to need to be close to a processor. And how these guys work is they'll take your 10 tons from you, they'll do an analysis on 5 kilograms of your 10 tons, and they'll give you what they call a total kernel recovery on that. So they'll crack those, they'll have a look at what the quality of your kernel is. And that's now where my dad's the specialist on how to get your kernel to be the greatest, because you've got to dry it, you've got to cure it, there's a whole bunch of things. But to go to the processing part of it, outside of the mechanical processing, your transport. So if you're 150 kilometers away from the nearest processor, and there are these kind of old school co-op processors where a group of farmers will send all their nuts to, because not everybody can afford a cracking plant.
Yeah.
That chews into your profit margin. So to go back quickly is, what is the driving factor behind wanting to do what you want to do? If it's for financial gain, and I don't mean it, in the way that your money hungry guys look at it. Oh, this is a golden crop. I can make a killing out of this with a couple of 1,000 tons of nut. Then you're going to need to look at something like that. If it's on a smaller scale, then you could probably look at a different fruit like macadamia nut. you're not going to process on your own. You're not. You're gonna have to send it to somebody that can crack it. Pecan nut, you can probably process on your own. It's not unaffordable to do. Avo, same story. There, probably your biggest cost is going to be cold storage. All of them have a life cycle as well. So pecan nut is 6 to 7 years before the tree starts. I don't want to say breaking even, but that's what the farmers call it, where it's now at a point where you're getting enough nut off the tree for the input that you're putting in. Macadamia nut is definitely 7 years. Avo, probably about 6 to 7 years as well for a decent bearing tree, before you've got a decent load coming off the tree. That's not as intensive as your nuts are, because I mean your nuts start off, what do they actually call them, a globule, some name. But anyway, that starts off with you picking it, packing it in sacks, putting it in the shade, getting it into your area, and then getting off to processing. Where your avos, you're going to pick them, you're going to pack them, and they've got to go into cold storage. There's no processing after that.
Right. And just on that, sorry, Justin. I've spoken to quite a few people recently regarding acorns and cooling and everything. With inverters and a few solar panels, it seems that you actually get cooling systems that are optimized to pull just what they need. So if you insulate the shit out of a room and you really design a room well, you can actually get away with that low power footprint relatively easy, but you have to invest in insulating it very well. Then your power input is minimal, because you get these cooling systems these days that they don't run on 100% capacity anymore. They're actually optimized for inverters, where they can go and they can run at 10, 30% or 20%, depending on what the requirement is. I don't know if you have insight in that. I've spoken to a few people. That seems to be the case as well. So again, you know, our whole idea is to build a system that's not reliant on Eskom at all, because you know how that ends. I mean, I'm feeling like a bit of a springhouse tonight here, and feel like I'm being hunted in this light. So yeah, Eskom struck me down just before this show.
I've also got a light on me there if I cover it.
So we both being hunted tonight. So thanks, Eskom.
Well, Carter, to be honest with you, my dad's Scottish. Well, Scottish heritage. So he'll turn the same R1 coin over 5 times. And the reason I mention that is when he started this whole thing, he was one of the guys that kind of put guava juice and guava rolls on the map, operating a guava farm from just outside Plaston in the Eastern Transvaal. And with him being very frugal, if I can call it that, he's always looked at ways of doing it. I'm going to shoot that guinea fowl. No, I'm not. He's always looked at how do you do it with the least possible energy requirement. So this old man has developed ways of building walls with cladding on that you harvest the heat out of it, the convection heat. So your fan is all of a sudden not an issue. Your heating element is not an issue, because in this cavity in the wall, with the sun shining on IBR, convection heat draws cool air in from the bottom, hot air out the top. There you're heating. From a cooling perspective, you lay pipes in the ground. The earth is always cooler. You've got to get a fan to move that air through the earth, through the pipes. There you've got cooling. And we'll often sit and we'll do drawings, or we'll do a spec for a particular site or for a particular job, and I love him to death. He always comes in with that approach is, well, what if there's no power? Okay, so then we need to use gas. And what if there's none of this? We need to do that. And that's why I think there's so much value in what we're talking about, because there are so many ways to do that. A lot of these dryers, he along with his mate Doran Bungie, they worked on fruit dryers, and they've now containerized them like in a 20-foot container, going to Africa. Now, Africa, outside of our borders, well, even here, barely has 3-phase power anywhere, especially in remote areas where a farm is sitting. So the farmer will put on a slab and say, I want to dry 1.5 tons of mango in 24 hours, and he'll design it. But then the farmer will say to him, but I don't have 3-phase power. And he'll how do I do this? Because conventionally you'd say, okay, well, give me, 9 3-kilowatt elements, put them in a ducted fan, and, we've got enough throughput to get all the moisture out. So he's had to apply his mind. Granted, we don't do a lot of that right now because most of the places have got that power, but that old school knowledge is there. And that's why I love engaging with him, because as much as I'll sit in SketchUp Pro and I'll start hammering out this intense drawing with elements and fans with the right cubic foot throughput, you'll be like, no. This is how we used to do it. And I think that ties in nicely with, look, if your energy requirement is high, you've got a problem, especially if it's electricity. If you can apply gas, which is what he normally pushes for, gas is far easier to come by, and it's far more efficient. But there are definitely ways of harnessing, like you were saying, solar panels and inverters. There definitely are ways of, from the outset, looking at what you're wanting to do. And it might mean, okay, your requirement is to cure a ton of nuts. If you were going to do it with 3-phase power, this is going to be your time frame. If you're going to do it the way you're talking about, your time frame is going to be Y. But all of those options are there. They're not out of the park. It's all possible, by and large. I say that refrigeration is probably your biggest challenge. ISO board panels, these ISO boarding from like Club Refrigeration, 100 mil polystyrene panel with chromic sheeting is incredibly efficient. And like you were saying earlier, there's a multitude of ways. One of his most favorite units that he uses in a cooling setup is your regular split air conditioner you'd find at home. And believe me, it works. It's ridiculous. But it's possible.
You're talking about cooling. So the other day, very recently, we went to I don't know, this shit existed. It's in I think it's the Eastern Free State, Purisberg.
Yeah.
There was a wine farm called the Bold Ibis. And we went there, and first off, Jesus, a wine farm in the Free State, that was a surprise. And who would have thought? And we got to the place, and it was a very nice place. It's, I think, the Rose House is the place's name. So we got there, did a wine tasting. First, I'm very surprised. And then, we got a bit of a tour. So the next day I said, listen, you're going to get, me and my girlfriend's anniversary, you're going to get a bit shit-faced today and live our best lives. Go to the tasting, go to the Purisberg, have a few beers there and whiskeys, and, just throw down the towel, and have a great time. And the next day, after all the nice adventures, we said, listen, we just want to have a little tour, because I'm also a fermentation. I like fermenting stuff, so I make my own fermented hot sauces. I make kombucha. I like making my own beer. Getting into making bread and lots of other wholesome stuff. I'll probably have to post content about that. Maybe schedule a bit of a workshop that everyone can do together. That's the idea. Like I said, if I want to teach, I have to get some credit and actually do it well, or get people that can do it well, because it's a collaborative effort. I don't know everything. So anyway, so we're there, and they take us through this whole place, right? So they take us first into their little, let's call it the cooling room. Now, my first observation is, okay, you guys took what you had. The guy is a QS, so he rebuilt what they had, but it's above ground. But I'm thinking, like, if I would have done this, and obviously it costs money, I can appreciate that, I would go underground. And I'm thinking in ways, like, immediately, intuitively, what would be very inexpensive to do underground? And I'm thinking, well, if you go deep enough, you can maybe, a container might not be the worst thing if you put it like deep enough underground, right? Because those shipping containers, because they have the capacity actually to resist the pressure from outside. So let's say you take it 1 or 2 meters. Again, scientifically, we know how cold it would be. We can actually measure that, how well it's insulated. And then you don't have to spend a fortune on insulating it, because it's already under the ground quite far enough. And like you say, if you have the pipes going down as well, technically speaking, like you say, maybe a fan or two, but like you say, just to move that cold air from underneath, that would actually work quite well. So that's the kind of shit I want to experiment with. I want people that are like your father, that's quite smart, and say, cool, because I'm also like that. I'm frugal as all hell. And anyone that respects permaculture is also like that. You take you take something, you upcycle it, and you don't want to spend a lot of money. You always want to take But you also want to build things that last, right? That's the other thing.
Yes.
We don't go and buy something that's Hong Kong that's going to last us like 3 or 4 months. We'd rather put in the money. If it has to be more expensive, we'll buy decent tools for what we need. But we also see the value maybe sometimes in building stuff. I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
And then what I saw as well to add to this is I was at Krafta, and I saw there are solar ovens that you can actually bake anything on that's completely running on solar, and then also solar dryers. So dehydration. So you can dehydrate biscuits, you can dehydrate nuts, you can dehydrate stuff, and it's a complete solar system.
Yeah.
So we have the technology, have these things at our disposal. And these are the kind of things that I want to use as well. Because like you say, I don't want to build a system that's so flipping expensive. So it's a solar system, but now I have to overspec it because everything's drawing so much energy. I still want to be frugal with my energy usage. And this is something that people need to be cognizant of. Like when you buy an appliance, and it's not a double or triple A, maybe pay the R1,000 more and not get a standard appliance, because that thing's going to ravage your energy bill. And when you do go solar, think of gas, think of appliances that are light. You don't have to go and sell an appliance, but just take into account where you can save. I've got a gas geyser at my ocean place. Everyone's laughing at me until these fuckers had 30 hours worth of load shedding. I'm like, so who's going to pay me 50 Rand per shower? and exactly, I got that because, they thought I was backwards. Like, man, gas geysers. Why do you want to do that? I'm like, because ESCOM. It's every fucking time ESCOM. And now I'm looking at ways. I've got a few.
Anyway.
Excuse me?
Gas is cheaper anyway. You gas
that's it.
Way more cheaper than electric.
Exactly. So I'm saving megabucks on my power every month. And I'm just like, guys, the problem is with being right next to the coast. So this is kind of I'm renting this place out, but it's like 5 minutes walk then you're at the ocean. But the problem is you could only do succulents here. They're the only things that survive. The saltiness in the air, that direct saltiness and the intensity of the wind, it ruptures the skin of the plants, and then that salt gets in and it just looks all bashed up. It goes like black. So you can't actually have something nice on the outside, but I can have plants on the inside because I have a nice window, but also half day. I need to know I get like 6 hours worth of sunlight there, and that's it. So could never plant here, could never stay here for that reason, because it would be next to impossible unless I have a hell of a lot of tents here to grow my own produce. So that's why I can. Yeah.
Whereabouts are you situated, Carter?
Okay, so first I was in Amanzimtoti, and then I moved to the Free State to Bethlehem, to a farm there. So that's where this whole StateProof Stoic thing started, and that's when I started. I now have a nice garden, lots of tomatoes and peppers and stuff are loading. I'm starting to gear up now, getting the big trays and planting them full of a lot of stuff. I'm using living seeds in a bowl strata. Got a few interesting crops from them. The nice thing is you also get tomatoes that are cold resistant, that you can actually start like kind of in the mid-end winter and then start planting them indoors, obviously, but still they can take a knock from cold. So these are tomatoes from like Siberia, but then also I'm a bloody chili head. So I also have like Carolina Reapers and other shit that I'm planting. And what I want to do is actually have the community sell to each other vegetables and stuff. I know you can buy from living seeds. You can actually buy seeds from them in crypto. So I also want to sell my seeds and my weed seedlings. I'm also growing wheat. Yes, I am. And I'm going to sell weed seeds as well soon, by the way. I'm signing up with a big distributor. So I'm going to make clones for people. They can buy that. They can buy the seeds. And they can buy seedlings from me. And they can pay me in crypto.
I don't know if you're going to see that. My babies, I'm busy nurturing them to life. My medicine.
I am so proud of you.
Hey guys, I'm going to show you mine. They're ready to harvest in a week's time.
Thank you, Gregory. Yes, I love it. Like, you know what I love the most, dude? I go to a conservative place like Bethlehem. I sit at a bar, and there's womies from 40, 50 years old, eh? And they're like, no, they start talking, and I'm just sitting there and I'm listening. And like, the other day I had one of these edibles, Jesus, and it made me buzz, and it was not when I was sleeping in like 20 minutes, but it was fun. And I'm just like, I'm so shocked how different, how that came, and it flipped.
Yeah.
Because 10 years ago, It was still this whole thing,
Very
and now
taboo.
everyone,
Yeah, taboo.
yeah, and that's completely shifted, and I'm very surprised and pleasantly so. So I'm seeing a big shift in that, and I'm also seeing that, I've got a little worm farm as well to create compost, and I try to compost in it. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm buying chickens in a portable coop. Now, what people don't know about chickens, they are excellent for clearing grass and stuff where you want to plant, and they also fertilize. So apologies for the language, because we don't give a shit on this show. They shit and piss everywhere. So in that little cage that I have, they'll scratch the ground, and then they'll shit on it and piss on it, and that will be a fertile patch of ground.
Yeah.
And then I can actually go, just give it a little till, and then I've got fertile place for my crops to grow. And the other cool thing is once the chickens are gone and you have problems with slugs, you can solve it in a natural way. You just get ducks. You get pecan ducks, which are delicious. They go in and they eat the shit out of those slugs. And again, other bigger insects as well, FYI. So I don't like throwing chemicals, like you say. I also like my shit organic. I want to do my vermicomposting. I want to take my excess food scraps, throw that to the chickens and the ducks so they can eat that. They lay nutritious eggs. Imagine never having to buy eggs again. Then imagine having 2 Jersey cows, which their meat is also good, by the way. So if they do come of age and they don't deliver in milk, you can, apologies for our sensitive, studying and brave listeners, you can slaughter them, and then you can get good meat. But Jersey cows also have very creamy milk, so you can actually make cheese and you can make butter from the milk. So imagine not having to buy eggs, butter, milk, or yogurt ever again.
Yeah. My wife and I were talking about just that the other day. So what do we need to line up in order to not have to go to spa? Is this a disappearing act or what is this, Carter?
Oh, sorry, I closed the windows because I got assaulted by the wind a while back. Like I told you, the ocean is right here. So this wind plays a bastard game with me sometimes, but it's chilled now. Yeah, dude, and that's the thing, right? You don't want to be a slave of the supply chain. Because every time we go to the shops, we're paying VAT. And again, that irks me. That's also what I want to get away from buying my alcohol. I actually want to make my own beer, start distilling my own stuff, and get away from sin tax. Because I hate donating money to this goddamn state so much that at the end of the day, I just want to completely...
You want to radar?
Yeah, dude, you really want to, because at the end of the day, remember, a service like Luno, you have to convert your rands to crypto. A service like Exodus, so you can check in this group on the StateProof crypto. We've got the Exodus wallet. If you just start accepting payments there, not saying you should ever dodge SARS because they are so benevolent, but if you happen to hate them, you can just accept payments and send money from that and crypto, and they will never be the wiser. That's what I'm looking at, dude. Like, if people are willing to trade, and remember, it doesn't have to be goods. It can be services. So I will be offering Microsoft 365 migrations, IT consultation in crypto as well. I'll also rent my place at Amanzimtoti for crypto. And that's the way I'm going, dude. I'm going to start doing everything that I do in crypto, and I hope people do the same. And then tools. If I'm looking at getting a fruit press. Because in my area in Bethlehem currently, and then hopefully in the Western Cape, there's a lot of grapes there, so I can make wine. I can actually come to you for a day, come press your fruit. Either I take 50% off that, or you pay me a fee in, again, crypto or cash, hopefully. And then you hire my tools. So it's tools, it's goods, and it's services that you can rent out to people. But I highly recommend, if it's expensive tools, stuff that can break, that you're precious about, you go with the tool. You don't just send your good tools to people. And then people come help you out, like working around the garden stuff. That's fine, because they're coming out to help you. That's great. But be precious about your good tools. And again, that's the way towards it. So we've digressed a bit. So you talked about being relatively in close proximity to the plants. I want to know what the term, especially for the listeners that don't know, curing your nuts is. It sounds fun and interesting at the same time. So if you want to just tell us what
I'll give you
because usually you put it in a bit of a jar and you kind of, Well, you first dehydrate it, then you put it in the jar with that little, I think it's a little bag that also makes sure that it doesn't get mold on it. And you kind of let it kind of dry out and age a bit. That's what I know of curing, is aging it almost a bit more.
That sounds deceptive. Well, not deceptively. That sounds uniquely individual to marijuana, which is all good. But to answer your question from a nut perspective, a nut has got a moisture content when it falls off the tree or when you shake it off the tree. And that's normally anywhere between 12 and 15% moisture content in the kernel. I'll focus on macadamia nut because it's slightly different to pecan. Macadamia nut has got that thick, hard shell. So it's in a hut, but then it's in a shell, and then the kernel sits inside. In order for you to crack that nut, it needs to be at a particular moisture content, say around 6% MC. And in order for you to cure it, you need to pass air over it, desaturated air. So your relative humidity and your air temperature and your, I don't want to say your air speed, but your air moving over it needs to very gently, very softly remove moisture, little bit by little bit by little bit. And in particular on a macadamia nut, because your shell's so thick, you're actually focusing on the kernel inside, that off-white cream juicy nut that's inside.
Right.
Its moisture needs to be able to travel through that thick, hard shell and then be lifted off by the desaturated or dehumidified air moving over it. So it's a slow process, about 7 to 10 days, depending on what you run it at. Probably about 25 degrees Celsius. And then you monitor your RH via PLC, or you can do it manually if you've got monitoring equipment, where you very slowly desaturate the nut. Your pecan's a lot quicker because your shell's a lot thinner. And you're basically, like I said earlier, you're focusing on the nut inside, drawing that moisture out, because your shell's going to act almost as a staging phase for the moisture. So you need the shell to be drier than the nut in order for the shell to pull the moisture out of the nut, and then your desaturated warm air moving over it is going to dry the shell. And there's set parameters around that. You cannot do it fast because you start getting acids forming in your nut, your oils. You'll see some of the macadamia nuts have got that, they become rancid. It's either because they've been dropped or they've been dried too fast. And this is where my old man comes into play. There's this plethora of all interlinked things that can affect how your product comes out once you've cracked it. It's originally, when I started getting involved in it, I thought, we're drying nuts. How difficult can that be? Put a fan on the damn thing, make sure it's hot. No. No. And it's been a learning curve ever since then. But it's beautiful how it works because it's fundamentally so easy to actually understand. It's just working with given technology to actually accomplish that. The pecan nut farmer we saw now in Untitled, he's been exporting, I think it's probably 2,000-3,000 tons of what they refer to as nut in shell. So that's your pecan nut like you buy it in those onion bags where you got to crack it in your hands.
Right.
But the owner now wants to ship to various EU countries, and they don't want it in the shell, they want it cracked. So all of a sudden a drying process needs to come into play now, because the nut needs to be have a particular moisture content for it to be palatable, for it to be sought after, because it gets graded. They'll test all of this, and it's the technology that needs to be put in place in order to get to that. So it's not a case of, well, actually, hang on, let me reverse that conversation. This guy that we're working with, if he finds the guy in Unkempdorp, if he finds his nuts are too moist, and I know this sounds horrible, but
we know that would happen in this conversation.
if he does a test, and they've got various ways of testing it, that the nuts are carrying too much moisture, he'll basically put them out on a sail in the sun. So even that is an option, but it depends on what your economies of scale are. What are you working with? How many kilograms, hundreds of kilograms, tons of nuts are you working with? If you're going to try and process 50 tons of nuts in a short space of time, you're going to need a you're going to need a fair amount of space to spread those out one layer thick so that the sun can dry them a little bit.
No, for sure. And the question I wanted to ask as well, if you keep the nuts in the shell, obviously it has a much better shelf life than when you obviously take it away, because that shell protects it from the elements, right? So obviously you drastically reduce the shelf life of a nut once you remove the shell, or am I a delusional idiot that doesn't know what I'm talking about? Enlighten us just on that point.
Look, I'm going to reserve comment because the guru is sitting upstairs having a honorary rangers meeting about Tankwa. But no, I don't think I'm not going to agree with you. You can leave a nut in the shell too long and it'll over dry, and it's not palatable.
So it's in what environment you're storing it that's more important than whether it's shelled or not shelled.
100%. So you need to retain a particular temperature and RH, relative humidity, for the life of the nut, whether it be nut in shell or kernel, for longevity. So this pecan nut farmer, they've now got to crack the nut. So the nut now has to, once it's been cracked and it's been sorted, is it a perfect half or is it a piece? Because that makes a difference to the buyer. That goes into a vacuum sealed bag. And we were looking at it today. So vacuum sealing is not just vacuum sealing. Do we replace the oxygen with nitrogen? Because oxygen is going to cause oxidization in the nut, and that plays on the acids and the oils in the nut. What does that net result on taste and on flavor? How long is it going to be in that bag? So there's all these fine little things, but that's all dictated by, when we go into the meeting, it's what is your expectation out of this? Because then we have to reverse engineer what the process is to get you to that, to kind of a predictable outcome that, in his instance, that you're as profitable as you possibly can be. But there are influencing factors. And no, I wouldn't agree that you can leave a nut in the shell and think it's going to be tip top, just like that, in your Spence or something like that. Were you to then follow, okay, nut and shell, I'm going to put it in a Hessian bag, but I'm going to put it in a cold storage at 17 degrees with an RH of 50. That will probably give you a good lifespan out of it.
Sorry, we've talked about RH quite a bit. Can you just elaborate on what RH is?
RH is your relative humidity. It's how much.
Okay, so it is humidity. Okay, cool. I was wondering earlier. Okay, cool. That's just
it's not as simple as that, because your RH changes depending on your temperature. Your temperature depends on what your relative humidity is at that given temperature. And I think that's one of the things I battle with to get my head around. So you don't just get 50% RH. No, you get 50% RH at every different temperature, because your air, the warmer your air is, the more the higher the more volume it expands.
Yes, that increases. I remember that from school. Like, also when it gets cold, it gets very, there's that that release in the air. There's mist, especially here in the evenings. If you come to KZN and you drive, always in the evenings when it gets colder, it cannot contain all that mist in the air anymore. That water, the water content is less. So when it cools down, it cannot keep it. So it's all this mist gets released. But when it's hot here and humid as all hell, then you don't see any mist or anything. It's just humid.
Yeah.
Because almost like the carrying capacity of the air, that it can carry more water, vapor, relatively speaking, on higher temperatures. On lower temperatures, it's like, no, we have to shed like Eskom, and then bad things happen.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So RH. Okay, so it's relative. It's called relative humidity because it's relative to your temperature.
Correct.
And then if you have to kind of doctor that in a way, you probably have to have a good ventilation system some way or the other to regulate that, I take it.
Well, you'll either heat or cool the air, one of the two. You probably won't cool the air. You'll take ambient air from outside, depending on where you are. But you would most likely, especially in the beginning of your curing or your drying cycle, you'd be introducing a lot of ambient air, which is your air from outside, and you'd be venting dense, moist air out of an electro vent, whether you're doing that via PLC on a servo or a controller, or manually. Because believe me, a lot of the African countries that have got a lot of the dryers that my dad's put in are still manual. So you're watching a readout, you're watching a simple little RH probe with an LCD display, and we're cock, hierdie ding is nog te nat, maak oop. So yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. think one last thing on the nuts, and then I think we need to move on to the avocados because we haven't been giving our avo brothers any love. And I think there'll be a lot of vegans on this just foaming by the mouth and just wanting to hear from the avos because they've had enough nuts in their life. When it, I just had to.
Not so vegan too, eh?
Gregory's right.
Look, the reason why I'm also going probably to the Western Cape, because I know there's an obsession with healthy food and organic food as well. So it's an excellent area of distribution that you gain from the Western Cape. And relatively speaking, LSM-wise, depending on what area you're in, there are people that have good spending potential versus in the middle of the Free State at, let's say, Bethlehem. A good distribution area close to me is obviously Clarence. So if you can have top produce and you have chefs that really care what they are doing, they'll be interested. And the only way to win them over is to give them a good box of produce and say, hey man, have a taste of this. If you like anything, let me know. That's how you get chefs on board. They don't want to hear stories about how organic or great you are. They want to taste it. But that's another story for another day. The other thing that I was thinking about, and oh God, here we go again to the rabbit hole. Nut butter. but for real. I went to a food expo and there was this little machine. It was quite incredible. It had these serrated plates, but you can see this is like the real thing. It's not like your home blender. And what they did is they took peanuts and pecan nuts and they just threw it in there and they put that thing on. And immediately within, I'm not shitting you, dude, that thing had a powerful engine in it. It was about 6 to 10 seconds. Those peanuts were butter. And you take like a teaspoon and you take it out and it's like peanut butter. Oh. That's how well those blades worked. So if you just add a hint of salt, you effectively have pecan butter, macadamia butter, or let's say peanut butter. 100% organic, nothing added. Because I hate it, especially, I've never understood this, right? If you ferment something, the pH drops low enough, so it's acidic enough that, and obviously you've got the good microbiomes in there, so they keep stuff stable. But the reason why I started fermenting is I always find, or pickling my own stuff, is there's always a shit ton of sugar and preservatives that names I cannot pronounce. Hydroxychloroquine and all these, not really, there was a COVID joke. Anyway, but yeah, always these strange preservatives and stuff that they put in, right, with these long chemical names. I'm just like, what the fuck are you guys doing? I understand that you want the maximum shelf life, so I can get that. But then the problem is in fermented food, you want the microbes. But they also always nuke these out, so it's the sterile thing.
Yes.
And this is what we've lost in our food supply, is we sterilize the shit out of everything. I understand why for long shelf life, but all those microbiomes, those things that used to reinforce our immune systems, made us stronger, made us better, we've cut that out for the sake of convenience and shelf life. And I think we've paid a hell of a price for that in the long run.
Dude,
no longer, yeah?
If I may.
Yes, go.
So last year when I found myself with my thumb up my arse and not much to do, I got a refund from SARS. Can you believe it? And I took.
My God, that's a miracle in itself.
So I took the money and I thought, hang on, I'm gonna get myself a little aquaponics setup going here because I had quite a bit of tilapia in the dam on my folks' property that I took out. And you were saying, you know, they nuke everything out of the food and they put preservatives, sodium bicarbonate, and all that kind of shit in. There is a marked difference between a lettuce grown organically in a aquaponic setup versus something you'll buy in Woolworths. The taste is chalk and cheese. So it actually starts before the processing or packaging. It's actually how you've grown it. I think that in order for them to maximize yield on their harvests, they're using the bare minimum fertilizer, the bare minimum water, the bare minimum of everything they can, because they've got to be economically viable from a financial perspective, but they still got to get their product onto market. Where you grow something in a setup like that, they're completely different. They're entirely different. So it actually, in my belief, and I could be wrong, I mean, I'm always open to learning. It actually starts right in the beginning where you can have where you can dictate what it's going to be. And I'll give you another example. There was a farmer in George. We went and spoke to you about a macadamia nut drying or curing. It's not drying, curing setup. And this guy, to touch back onto one of your earlier points, had such a beautiful setup running there. He didn't use any fertilizer on his farm. Everything that he pruned off his trees and all the grass that he cut and everything that came off this 54 odd hectare farm, he'd pack into rows, and he bought himself the funniest machine I've ever seen. It basically packs these long speed bumps that are my height, and once a week he takes this machine and he drives over it, and it mulches everything and it throws it 1 meter to the right. So he's tossing his stuff, and then he waters it every 2-3 days. So his whole macadamia farm is fertilized via what he's removing off the farm in terms of his grass cuttings, his pruning cuttings, the shells, you name it.
Using all the organic matter that would be waste products and making fertilizer from it. What a champion.
And his macadamia nuts are phenomenal. That tells you something.
It tells you this. So I want to get back to what you said earlier. So when you say they minimize minimally, you're right. They use the N, the P, and the K. They don't go for micronutrients. They don't think about the living organisms in the soil. This is what monoculture has forgotten. When you go organic, you are actually building a microbiome around your plants with microorganisms. These organisms intrinsically also help with feeding your plants. It helps with producing and breaking down those macronutrients into micronutrients, and it helps feed that entire ecosystem. If that entire ecosystem is healthy and you keep feeding the soil, you get more, you get earthworms, you've got a lot of organic and living matter there. Shit, if you can go even a step beyond and have a few mushroom beds in between, that fungi, but man, then you go next level.
I think people will be surprised if they know the level of mycelium underground in root structures. There's a lot of YouTube things, and I'm happy to go and look for them.
Fantastic Fungi on Netflix is the best one. They're easy, they're the quick and dirty one for you to go into. Yeah.
But it is phenomenal. I think there's so much missed in the fungi side of things, mycelium side of things. It's phenomenal. It's almost like probably one of the building blocks of everything. So, and I think when you work from an organic perspective, I mean, you go to your AgriCorp and you go and buy your couple of tons of your fertilizer and you throw that on. I don't think that feeds that system that's below ground level. It might have on paper what it is that is supposed to be going in, but on a true macronutrient level, it's not there.
It's not that.
I don't think so.
They do macro, they don't do micro, and you're right. And these things don't feed the biome. And again, the mycelium allows that whole network. So if it connects to different plants, that neural network allows for communication, and not just communication, they can exchange nutrients with each other. That's insane. It's been proven. So it creates this insane underworld. So you have to actually then, I think, again, permaculture. So these are two books that I'm getting into. So I'm not a humble brag or anything, but the original architect, sorry for the light, Bill Mollison, Introduction to Permaculture. So they cover everything in permaculture, and permaculture is an amalgamation of a lot of disciplines. And then this is the second one. My third one, I think the essay post also stole. And then I've got the Resilient Homestead as well from John Seymour. Unironically starts in the Karoo in South Africa, then goes up to Africa, hunts with the Khoisan, but it goes like about him as well. He saw the problems with globalization, the problems we'll have with our food systems with globalization, how we fucked up our food supply systems, and where it would go. But anyway, again, I digress. The point is, you're right. We have to think about when we produce our own is about how can we create holistic systems, right? Where I have the chicken that in my square movable little pen where I have to, if I'm going to farm, I have to take the unnecessary effort out of it and let nature do its thing. The chickens can do it for you. The ducks can eat the slugs. So a lot of people are struggling. They've got a plague of slugs and then they nuke it with chemicals. I'm like, no, fuck it. Let the slugs walk there for a few minutes every day. And the slugs don't usually bugger up your garden. Chickens do, though. They're very destructive. Again, that's why you should keep them in a little square pen, move them around. But again, they scratch the ground and they they plow it for you and make it perfect and ideal for when you want to plant. And when the ground is ideal, you just move it and you've got fertilized ground.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, you just keep adding fertilized vermicompost and stuff to your ground, and you get good yield from your vegetables. And also, thing I want to mention, this is true in cannabis, and I think it's also true in vegetables. If you just feed NPK to them, on a genetic level, they only activate some genes. But if you give them a rich diet, like you say, I mean, look at a person. Think of it from a person level. If I fucking only feed you McDonald's, yeah, you live, but you'll be a bit of a fatty. And you'll also be a bit unhappy, almost like the WEF wants us to be. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? But if you have a person that's very well fed and he gets his sleep in properly, that person will look let's make it your twin, right? Let's make this more interesting. So genetically, you're exactly the same. I feed one person McDonald's and I feed one person Homestead Greens.
Yeah. It's going to be chalk and cheese.
Exactly. So onto that. So certain genetic triggers, when you eat better as well. I know this is true in weed as well. It activates certain genes in it, and that makes the plant look better, present better, taste better, because it has the things it needs to actually expend that energy. Yes. But I'm going to digress from that point now and then say, let's move a bit to the avocado side, because you haven't given that topic any love as of today. So
can I ask you for a 15-second gents break?
Go, do it. Gregory, you and I can mansplain stuff to each other while our esteemed guest is on his men's break, gents break.
We're not talking about nuts again.
Oh, dude, I just find the notion of, I don't know, dude, like growing my own berry and my own berries and nuts and fruit and everything is just the best thing I think, you can have. My grandparents had a ton of trees, and my dad always said, yeah, but it's not worth it because everyone takes from it. And now the other day I was just sitting there, I'm like, but fuck, I've got the solution. Go to the people that work for you and go plant a fuck ton of trees there, and they've got enough supply and they won't take yours. That's your solution. So for every week or month someone works, they get a tree. That's their reward. Or a stacky so they can grow their own. And then once they've got enough supply, they won't take from your garden. So yeah, I just solved one world hunger in one fell swoop, I know. But it is it was a contentious issue always for my dad, so it was an interesting one.
That makes sense.
Okay, Justin, so back to Avo. Sorry, I just told the story about
no, I heard.
Yeah, okay, cool.
It wasn't that far. That's a lekker bossie netty so.
Nice. I wanted to say it's either after Baki or Bossi and or yeah, in a bottle for you.
The plants.
So Justin, okay, cool. So we've talked a bit about nuts. Obviously, with your old man, it'd be nice to, have focused episodes where we say, okay, cool, today's Macadamia Day, today's Pecan Day, and we really go into depth, and we can make it several episodes. But let's focus a bit on the Avo. It's a very nice crop that I know very little about. Obviously, in my mind, growing up on a farm, and like you mentioned earlier, there's different varieties. I take it's true in the pecan world, in the macadamia world, and pretty much with everything. Yeah. Depending on the area you're in, they'll have different attributes. They might be a bit more drought resistant, or whatever the case might be. What do we look at when it comes to avos?
Dude, I'm going to say straight off the bat, this is where I would love my dad to be next to me, because he had a phenomenal avo farm in the Nelspruit, and I've been more involved in the nut sides. I've got a bit of understanding of avos. They're very finicky, but they yield high if you look after them. As far as I recall, your two predominant cultivars are Hass and Fuerte, and that'll be largely dictated by your rainfall, your altitude, in terms of how they're going to respond and how they're going to grow. Memory serves me correct. Listening to my dad talk all those years ago, there's a lot of work that needs to go into them, and they're probably not as resilient as the nut varieties that we're talking about. But again, very high value crop, probably one of the most stolen crops out there. You've seen them being sold on the side of the road. I mean, my mom went to, where did she go the other day? Either Spa, I know, my mom doesn't do Checkers, my mom does Woolworths, I remember now. I think it was 16 Rand for an Avo, and it was probably about 4 inches high. It was literally this big, and I thought to myself, I still said to my dad, how much were you selling a crate of Avos for? And he sat there scratching his head, and it basically came down to daylight robbery for the farmer, which tells me one thing. It's, again, a high-value crop, but that's something that we know. I know root funguses on them is a problem. I recall being on the farm at one stage, and they had to be injected to resolve an issue in the roots. I've never in my life heard of a tree being injected.
If you guys gave it the COVID-19 vaccine.
No, it would have been fraught by now.
Nice.
So, honestly, on Avos, I'd love him to be sitting here and chatting with us, because there he knows everything. I've been more involved on the nut side of things.
Cool. So we'll reserve that one then for now. Other wild card that I've heard, you talk about how quickly you get a return on the nut trees, right? I've heard in the Western Cape, almonds is this one that's coming in that's doing quite well, and it's cutting down on that return on investment time. Do you have any insight on that?
Not on almonds, but no. What I've picked up here is, maybe not in the Western Cape so much, more in the Eastern Cape, southern part of the Eastern Cape, is berries. The guys up there are putting tunnels up that that's correct for niks nie. And when querying them, it's berries. As for almonds, no. I can do a bit of scratching around, and my dad might actually very well know a bit, but off the bat, almonds, no. I would think, from what I've come to learn about pecans and macadamia nuts, is what is your post-harvest processing requirement, because that's probably going to give you an indication in terms of what you're going to plant as a crop, depending on what you're expecting out of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So just a question then: the people that just take their nuts and they just sell them in the open market, they don't care about anything like that. How much more could they make if they actually, maybe on a percentile or something? I don't know. I'm pushing my luck here. I know the old man should probably be here, but let's say someone just produces the nuts and they just bulk send it to the market. What are they missing out on, and what are the things they can do to actually earn more? And I take it comes into the curing side, as you mentioned earlier.
That's probably got the biggest impact on it for that particular scenario. So it's how you've handled it. The reason I say that is a macadamia nut, you don't want to drop higher than 60 centimeters. You drop the macadamia nut once and it gets hurt inside. So you won't know if you'll cure it, you'll crack it.
Sounds like my ex-girlfriend. I just dropped her 60 centimeters and she got so hurt inside. So I just had to.
From somebody who's growing them, your post harvest is critical. How you treat the nut, how you look after. I mean, with a macadamia nut, it's as simple as you pick them up off the ground and you put them in a bag. Do not put the bag in the sun, because the tractor with the trailer is only going to come along 4 or 5 hours later. Those 4 or 5 hours play a role on what's happening inside the bag on the outer shell of nuts. It's that finicky.
Sure.
Yeah. So you put your bag in the shade. You load your bag onto the trailer behind the tractor with ease. When you put it into the storage bins, your average storage bin will probably carry 8 to 9 tons. That's about the industry standard. You've got inside it what's called an easy letdown. So it's a spiraled gutter that when the nuts get filtered in the top of the conveyor, they don't fall down, they roll down. It's these finer things which ultimately result in what they call TKR, total kernel recovery, where you take off your farm, say you've labored for the year and you've got 5 tons of nuts. It's not bad, by the way. He's going to take 5 kilograms or 10 kilograms out of that, and he's going to crack all of them, and he's going to make an assessment and average that over your batch that you've brought, and he's going to pay you according to that. So he's going to rate you on the color, the size, if they're in holes, if they're in not if they're in holes and halves, because that'll happen with the cracking. But they've got set criteria that they look at, and then they'll average that. They'll apportion that formula across your entire yield that you brought in, and they'll pay you out for that. So from a curing perspective, the more you can look after your nut and treat your nut the way it's supposed to be treated, the higher your yield is, your recovery rate is on a cracked nut. And
Nice.
I don't know how many people can listen to this, but I have no doubt that there's a lot of farmers out there that know this, but I'm kind of seeing that there are farmers that don't. Because
I can think of a few right about now where I've never seen anything resembling a curing plant of any kind. So you're right. I think there's a lot that don't, eh?
And I have no doubt they'll go and deliver their nuts, and it'll be weighed, and they'll be assessed, and they'll get a payout. And that payout will be relative to the quality of the nut. And they can probably sit back with a calculator and figure out, well, if I could up that, my kernel recovery will be higher, ergo my payout will be higher. But what is that financial implication? And that's where my dad and I jump in, is, well, if you're going to put in a 1.5 million rand plant, your ROI is going to be paid off based on your hectarage and your yield per hectare over that period of time. The feeling I get is that, and it might just be a sign of the economy, that's too much for some of the guys to take on, or they're too far from the processor, which goes back to what I was saying right in the beginning, is location, depending on what you want to do, needs to be taken hand in hand with where's your local processor. If you're not a trust fund baby, or you invested in Bitcoin 5 years ago,
Yeah.
it's gonna cost you.
On that regard, where in the West Cape is most of the processors located? If you know,
I wouldn't be able to, but I know there's somebody big in George, because one of the guys we consulted with March, April in this year, he had a fair sized farm, and him and all the farmers around him. I mean, we drove around on his farm, and he showed us, this one pit and this fruck, and they all had serious hectares put together. None of them had a processing unit, which alludes to the fact that there must be somebody close by. So I think a valuable exercise would be to understand where those guys are and what they process, and taking that into account, what is it you're wanting to do? How many hectares are you putting? Are you going to want to put the stuff on the market, or are you going to be wanting to trade or barter with it, or what is it you're wanting to doing? And that'll dictate where you want to do. Because if you're going to want to make money out of it, you're going to have to be close to a processor, unless you've got bucks to do your own small processing plant, which is not a cheap exercise. This Pecan nut guy we saw, Nanyan Kempdorp, he's looking at just over a bar for a nutcracker, and that's not the thank you, my babe. That's not the sizing unit that sizes them, because that's critical. So there's a couple of things you need to take into account. But again, like I said earlier, when my dad and I go into a meeting, it's what are you aiming at? What are you looking at doing? And then we'll reverse engineer it from that. You're ensuring you've got a good product. Your nuts are good. Now let's see where you fit in to give you what it is that you want. Processes, though, to answer your question, I know I've digressed. I do this often. Sorry.
No, it's good. You've given some good insights in your digression. I hope I do the same someday.
I'm happy to, when I got a bit of a gap, have a look where the major guys are. I'm sure my dad will just be able to call them off the top of his head.
Yeah. And then areas, maybe again, not off the top of your head, but places that you consulted in, trees you've seen growing quite well. What areas in the Western Cape are quite conducive to maybe I know maybe macadamias and pecans want two very different things. So start with the one and then follow up with the other. And then also, where do we find avos that you've seen? I know you've only been there for a bit of time. So again, we'll bring the old man in, but you can recall on the top of your head.
Dude, avos, I haven't seen anywhere yet. And I haven't heard my dad talk about it. I mean, I sit next to him in the office. Excuse me, when I said to him, listen, I want to drag him in on this meeting, area wise, and the first thing that popped into his head was Montague. So that would be an area to look at. It's not maybe the Western Cape, but the George area, the guys are doing phenomenally well with macadamia nuts there. It's actually crazy if you look at the amount of trees, the amount of hectares under macadamia. But again,
is it George has a higher rainfall, or what's the difference there?
I would think it's a high rainfall, and it's it's also probably got to do with your natural soil presentation. It just seems to be the right makeup and the right mix. Whether that's got to do with drainage, that the roots don't sit in, or the root structure doesn't sit in moisture for too long, I don't know. I'm happy to dive to climb down that rabbit hole. But off the top of my head, I would say Montague, based off what my dad said. It would be interesting to go and have a look where they are and what the altitude is and what the average rainfall is and temperatures, because that's what the tree's about, regardless of what you're looking at. Every fruit, every plant has got its own particular requirements that will allow for good growth.
Okay, excellent. Okay, cool. Now that'd be interesting to me, because like you said, I know for most probably you won't be able to grow everything in one place, but I know the pecans actually do well in the Free State, and that's a really relatively high iron, red soil, high drainage kind of sandy like soil. Same with the potatoes there. They do quite well there for some odd reason. Good drainage and everything. So maybe having more than one base where you grow different things is maybe an option. So if I can get a bit of space in the Free State for some crops, maybe the pecans, and then the macadamias more, again, like you say, it's more towards George, not so much Cape Town, but knowing where to look, where it's actually viable, that's important, because you can't just set up shop somewhere and it doesn't work well, because obviously it's been tried and tested in the area.
There's quite a few variables that come into play, and I mean, to give you an example that might just frame it a little bit better for you, the Avo farm that my dad had in Nelspruit, as windbreaks, they would use pecan trees, and they paired well. So there's, that can work together. I haven't seen pecan and macadamia pair well, but it's not impossible, because the Eastern Transvaal, the Lowveld, is renowned for macadamia and for pecan, but I've never seen them on the same farm. I might just, have shutters on my eyes. I don't know. I've seen Avo and pecan.
Yes.
But it's having a look. I don't know if you're going to get a climate or a biome where you're going to be able to get all three going.
Exactly.
Maximum potential.
No, for sure.
That's why I'm thinking. Can I just ask something here?
Sure.
Yes, go.
How big do these trees get for the pecan nuts, the macadamians and Avos? How big do they actually get when they're like a mature size?
But it depends how you prune them. But generally, your pecan tree is probably a little bit bigger than your Avo tree. I'm trying to think. You could probably plant them about 4 meters apart.
Okay.
And then if you watch your pruning, you're gonna get a decent yield, because you obviously want to give the tree enough breathing space. Your pecan you can run higher in terms of physical height, which it's going to give you a better yield with a smaller footprint. Where your Avo, a little bit stockier, still a fair sized tree, but that widens out a little bit more. But you're looking anywhere from 4 meters to 6 meters, between trees in rows which are 4 to 6 meters apart.
Okay, I think you're also going to consider the root growth. You want them fighting over space with roots, with different trees, or even the same trees. If they're too close together, they can stunt growth by fighting for root space.
No, you say that. They actually, and it's what we were talking about the fungi earlier, they'll actually look after each other. They create a synergistic, if that word even exists.
They almost become like one tree.
Yeah.
Reaching their roots together. Okay. And some plants work well together. Others initially start killing each other off by the roots.
No, they will.
Especially if it's companion plants, like you say, like the avos and the pecan. It was the avos and the pecans that work well. Like basil and tomato as well. They've got a symbiotic relationship as well. Yeah. So there are many things that actually work together nicely, and like you say, they'll actually help each other out. Yeah. One way or the other.
100%. But you know what? I'll make a note, and I'll chat to my dad. I'm actually going to rope him in definitely for the next one. And with regards to your questions around the Avo and the processes, I'll pick his brain a little bit.
Yeah, it would also be nice, like the other problem with, well, I wouldn't say the problem. I mean, this is the price of prosperity, right? The Western Cape is quite expensive in general if you want to buy anywhere. So what areas are kind of still those fortresses that are still untamed, that you can go and get a relatively nice plot or farm and not pay your ass off? all of these things, but that will probably be in your dry areas. I don't know. Again, don't know the area well enough to know yet. So it also, I'm looking at that. It has to be, Jesus, I don't want to pay 5 million rand for fucking 3 hectares. So that's just ridiculous. So one has to look at many factors. And then I know there's a lot of people that have a lot of land and they don't give a shit about it. And they'll be happy for someone to be there and do something productive on it. I'm kind of working on a bit of a project there. So let's see how we end up with that. There's another few things in the pipeline that might come up in the next month or two that I'm busy with. But still hard negotiating and finding kind of that nice middle ground of, okay, cool, I want to do my own thing, but I'm open to saying, cool, you know what, I'll stay somewhere, but if you can give me land and I can give something nice to you back, what does that look like? They give you a bit of nuts, do I give you a bit of vegetables every month? Do you just want to say, cool, this is my place and it's awesome? What is your ideals with this place here? And that's always the problem that I have, and that's why I want to have my own, because the moment that I have to fucking ask permission to do something, it just rubs me up the wrong way. And that's why I've started this whole thing. It's kind of all about that independence vibe. So I don't know if I have to find very creative ways on how to get this started. And it's going to be an interesting journey to get there. So I'm looking at a lot of ways to do it. So whether that's expoing, like I said, whether it's R&D, performing a lot of R&D there, getting universities involved and some agri-colleges to come do their practical there to help fund the initiative. You have to be creative. So if you have any ideas, throw it my way. I'm open for ideas.
Microgreens. Put microgreens on your radar.
Already started 2 months ago. A very interesting prospect. And you're right. It's actually a quick crop that grows quickly. It needs very little because it's a young crop. It just feeds off the seeds and it actually yields like a motherfucker. So it's interesting.
You can stack it. You could take 100 square meters and stack it 4 high and get 400 square meters. It's nutritious. We've been dabbling it with a little bit here and juicing it through a masticating juicer. But I think from a monetary perspective as well, like you were saying earlier, you approach a restaurant and you say, taste some of my Swiss chard. The guy's gonna say, damn son, can I buy?
Son?
Yeah. Don't lose sight of that as well. Keep that on your radar. Microgreens, I believe. The only drawback I found with microgreens is seed price. It's crazy. Maybe I'm buying from the wrong seed people, but also very valuable.
Where did you buy from, if I might ask?
Seeds for Africa, down here in Cape Town somewhere.
They're not bad on the bulk side. I'm looking at living seeds and bulk straw as well. And I'll get into it and then see where's the best bulk prices as well, because I'm also trying to get to the bottom of that, what that looks like. And like you say, also what's the supply and demand looking like? Sometimes they've got an insane demand, and another guy is like, we're not selling that much. And another one that I want to do is I actually want to have a tower with strawberries. I've got one that's about this high at home. Just want to fucking pump that full of strawberries. And then there's an emerald basil. In the winter, I want to grow that because basil gets shit expensive in the winters. So probably want to do that as well. But lots of ideas, dude, like I said. And the idea is to try a bit of everything. Like I said, I've got 10 varieties of basil. I've got probably 20 varieties of tomatoes. I've got about 40 to 50 varieties of chilies. So growing them all, testing them out in the market, seeing what they do, and then getting a bit of momentum on them. But dude, it's an hour and 30 minutes. I don't want to keep you much longer. I want to thank you tonight for attending. I want to say Gregory, yes, I got that right. Gregory, our Wolfsian of the Fireside Chats. Thanks for joining. And dude, we'll catch up soon, man. And thanks so much. Speak to your old man. Like I say, I'm good to do an Avo Macadamia series for the next few weeks. Okay. So you guys tell me that the time of evening, what day, let's say like Wednesdays or whatever day in the week and a time that works for you on a weekly basis. And we'll just keep on going on this thread here so people can come back and watch it. I'll also upload it onto YouTube as well, so the people on there can see it as well.
Fantastic.
Enjoy the beer. Thank the broad for her attentiveness and bringing your beers and looking well after you. And thank the father for the wisdom as well. Much obliged.
Gregory, nice to meet you. Carter, you too, my friend, and looking forward to the chats.
Okay, man. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Good evening.
Yeah.